Resourceful Designer, episode 183. With age comes wisdom.
Welcome to the Resourceful Designer podcast, offering solutions to streamline your graphic and web design business so you can get back to designing. And now your host. He turns 50 years old this week. Happy birthday, old-timer, Mark DeCote.
Well, thank you very much for that, Wayne. Yes, this Thursday, September 26, I will be turning 50 years old. And even though I know that I have fewer years ahead of me than I have behind me, I am completely ready to embrace this next stage of my life because I know I have so much more to offer and, of course, so much more to learn. Speaking of which, in this episode, I'm going to talk about some of the lessons that I've learned throughout my design career. But that'll be after sharing a resource with you that can help keep you connected with like-minded designers and help you grow your design business. Now, what have I been up to lately? Well, I finally dug myself out from being on holidays, caught up with all the emails, the proposals, now stuff are coming in. I've picked up a couple of new web clients, which is great. But what wasn't fun is at the beginning of this week, I had to fight a malware infestation on a couple of my client websites. Started off with one where iTheme Security alerted me that malware was detected on one of the sites. And that's just something I want to say. No matter what security you have, I use iTheme Security. No matter what you use or how robust your security is, nothing is foolproof. There's always a chance that something gets through. If security was so strong, hackers wouldn't even be trying. But the fact that they always are just means that eventually something will be compromised. And earlier this week, one of my client sites, as I said, detected malware. Now, it was easy. Because of the security measures I have in place and the backups, it was very easy to just roll back the site a couple of days, install a backup. Nothing had been changed, so it was very easy to do. But then the following day, I got notice that two of my other client sites were infected as well. So even though they didn't take a lot of time to fix, and yes, both of those I was able to remedy in the same manner, just installing a backup. And even though all three situations took less than 30 minutes to fix, it was still something that just interrupted my day that was unexpected. But when you offer maintenance as part of your web hosting, it's one of the things you got to look out for. As I mentioned, I use iTheme Security along with Backup Buddy from iThemes, and that's what got me out of this jam, or all these three jams, I should say. And if you're interested in knowing more, visit resourcefuldesigner.com/iThemes and see if they're the right security and backup solutions for you. Now, as I said in the intro, this week's Resource of the Week will help keep you connected with like-minded designers and help you grow your own design business. And yes, I'm promoting my Resourceful Designer community. I am absolutely loving the relationships that are being built in the community right now. The private Slack group for community members, everything is happening there. Every day there's people talking, communicating, getting to know each other. We're asking questions, we're helping out, we're getting critiques on work. But best of all, we're getting to know each other. Zach and Robert, who are just starting their design businesses, or Mike or Oris, who are well-established web designers, and so many others that are joining in on the conversations, helping out when they can, sharing advice, sharing resources, and just getting to know each other, much more so than we ever have in the Facebook group. And that's not to say I don't love the Facebook group, but knowing you have a dedicated group of designers that you can turn to in a pinch is an extremely valuable resource. Add in the monthly video chats where we get to see each other face to face and communicate verbally, and it just adds on to the whole experience. Now, if you are working from home and you sometimes feel the isolation of being by yourself, then this community is for you. As Catherine, the newest member of the community, is saying, it's helping her grow as a designer and as a small business owner every single week. So if you're interested in finding out more, please visit resourcefuldesigner.com/community, where you can read all about it and, of course, join up if it's something you're interested in. And now, with age comes wisdom. Now, I chose that title not because I think I'm very wise, but because it's inevitable that as time passes, all the ups and all the downs, all the successes, all the failures, all the roadblocks, and all the hurdles that have been overcome they all add up. And whether you realize it or not, each one of those things helps in its own way to shape you into the person you become. Now, as I approach my 50th birthday in a couple of days, I can't help but ponder and reminisce on the choices that I've made in my life, the paths that I've followed, and of course, the journey that's still ahead of me. And I've come to better appreciate something that I, and I'm sure you as well, already know, that with age comes wisdom. And what use is wisdom if you can't share it with people? Now, I'm not talking about being a know-it-all. Please, please do not be a know-it-all. I'm talking about using the knowledge that you've gained over time, whether you're 80 years old, 50 years old, or even if you're 20 years old. Use that knowledge to help the people you serve. And those people include your family, they include your friends, they include people in the communities you frequent. And yes, it also includes your design clients. If you're a longtime listener of Resourceful Designer, you've heard me say before on the podcast that no matter what stage you're at in your design career, to everyone else out there who knows less than you do, you're a professional. Even if you're fresh out of school and you've never worked on a real client project, when it comes to designing, you are a professional compared to the majority of people out there. Hold on to that thought every time someone questions your prices or tries to negotiate some sort of special deal with you, great for exposure and that sort of thing. Hold on to that thought that you are a professional and should be treated as such. You're wiser than what they give you credit for because of the time you've put in to get to where you are now, regardless if that's fresh out of school, designing for somebody else, or running your own design firm. Nobody can take any of that away from you, and nobody has the right to devalue what you've learned during your time so far. Have I ever told you that Resourceful Designer is the third name I chose for this podcast? I first came up with the idea of doing this podcast way back in 2014. It was actually shortly after I turned 45 years old. I had just passed the threshold of early 40s to late 40s. Now, I know there's the whole mid-40s thing, but face it, once you hit that 5 in the number, you're on the downward side of that hill. And as I realized back then that I was in the later part of my 40s, I started looking at my future. And I started getting these thoughts in my head saying, Mark, who's going to want to hire a 45-year-old designer, let alone a 50-year-old or a 55 or a 60-year-old designer, especially with all the great young talent I was seeing online. Not to mention that this up-and-coming generation that now sees business owners and managers and CEOs that are in their early 30s, if not still in their 20s, I kept thinking, wouldn't these people want to partner with someone closer to their own age? Now, luckily, I didn't stay in that funk for too long. In fact, it didn't take me that long to start appreciating that at 45, I had garnered a lot of useful knowledge and skills. Wisdom, if you want to call it that. Things that could be very useful to that younger generation of business people. I had my 15 years experience working at the print shop to pull from, as well, at that time, a 9-year-old design business that was going really well. Now, I had already been podcasting about TV shows at that time, so I knew what I was doing when it came to podcasting. So I decided to take that newfound knowledge and start a design-related podcast. And I was going to call it The Aging Designer. Yep, that was going to be the name. I even designed a logo for it. It had a beautiful hourglass and everything just to show the whole aging process. I know, corny, thinking back on it, wow. But I was going to use the podcast as a platform to talk to other 40, 50, 60-year-old designers in a way to remind them that we still have a lot to share with the younger generation. I even recorded an introductory episode to that podcast, but I never published it. Now, I sat on that podcast idea for quite a few months, not doing anything with it. And it was all because something just didn't feel right with the whole concept. Now, finally, I shared my frustration with some of my trusted podcast friends, and they told me that the knowledge and the wisdom that I wanted to share with my audience, although useful to people my own age or older, the information I wanted to share might be better served to a broader audience. So that's when I switched gears from how to survive as an aging designer to how to grow and thrive a home base or, freelance design business. And if you've been with me since the beginning, you know I do not like the word freelance. In fact, if you haven't been with me since the beginning, go back and listen to episode 17, where I actually talk about why being a freelance designer can actually hurt your design business. So back then, with renewed enthusiasm and a clear path for the podcast, I renamed the show The Wise Designer. I bought the domain names, I started switching the website up that I had already built, and although I never actually got around to designing the logo for The Wise Designer, I can tell you I was actually researching owls, because when you think wise, yeah, I know, again, corny. But I soon started thinking that, maybe using that name, people might think I was, pretentious or something. I could just imagine somebody out there thinking, who's this jerk calling himself wise? So I did a little bit more contemplating, and I finally settled on Resourceful Designer. And you know what? I'm glad I did. In fact, the word resourceful has actually helped me to stay on track and navigate the direction for this whole show. There has been times where I've thought of a podcast idea, and then I said, no, I won't do that because it doesn't really sound like a resourceful idea. So finally, almost a year after I decided to make a podcast, I launched Resourceful Designer. And in fact, September 30th, just a few days after my birthday, will mark the 4th anniversary of Resourceful Designer podcast. Now, this podcast has allowed me to share my experience, share my knowledge. You can call them wisdom if you want, but regardless, it's allowed me to share what I know with designers like you. I don't know how old you are. I don't know at what stage of your design career you're at or what discipline of design you're pursuing for that matter. And I don't know where in the world you live. I don't know your background. I don't know your heritage. Because none of that matters. What does matter is that you're a designer who cares enough about your current or potential business that you want to listen to a podcast about running a design business. That's what counts. So I went from a potential target audience of aging designers to a target market of enthusiastic designers who want to grow their design business. And I love what I've done. And you know what? One of the reasons I love it so much is I've probably gained more value from doing this podcast than you have from listening to it. This podcast, for one, it keeps me rejuvenated. It keeps me curious. It keeps me informed. And it makes me feel relevant. Yes, I'm turning 50 this week, and I'm ready to embrace that. I'm ready for whatever lies ahead on my journey. Those doubts that I felt turning 45 and wondering who would want to hire a 45-year-old designer, those are long behind me. I have more today to offer as a designer than I have at any part of my career to date. And I'll be able to say the same next year, 5 years, 10 years from now. Because those skills, that knowledge, and that wisdom is accumulative. And that's a great thing. And I hope you feel the same way. No matter what stage of life or what stage of your career you're at this present moment, embrace where you are. Embrace aging. Appreciate the skills that you're accumulating right now, the knowledge that you're gaining right now, and package it all up into that ball that we like to call wisdom. And then use that wisdom to benefit those around you, even if that wisdom is just to explain to a client why making the logo bigger won't help the situation. So that's my little birthday message. Now, if you have any comments for this episode, please leave them at resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 183. Now, I'm going to skip the question of the week this week, but I know by looking at my mailbag that I don't have that many to answer. So if you would like your question answered on a future episode of the podcast, and you won't have to wait that long to get it answered, please visit resourcefuldesigner.com/feedback to submit your question. And I'd like to just take a minute to bring up the topic again of a name for the community. I mentioned in the last few episodes that I'm trying to come up with a name to call you, a Resourceful Designer listener, somebody who is part of the whole Resourceful Designer family. Now, so far, the leading name is Resourcefulite, but I really want to know if you could think of something better. If so, please send me an email at feedback@resourcefuldesigner.com and let me know what you think would be a good name for Resourceful Designer followers. So that's it for me this week. I am Mark Decote, your 49-year-old host, wishing you all the best with your graphic design business. And I'll catch you next week at age 50. Until then, stay creative.
Thanks for listening to the Resourceful Designer Podcast at resourcefuldesigner.com.